Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can anyone hear me? Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Oh, we can hear you.
Okay, have you gone live?
Yes, we are live now. Please start.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live class. My name is Paul Igweze, and I'm going to be walking you through data types and some other core concepts in PHP. And for some of you that are new and those that haven't been able to set up their PHP development environment, I would advise you go over to download and install a web server. A web server, you can download XAMPP. You can download XAMPP. I recommend you download XAMPP for this course. And you can also choose to download any other web server stack package, which is compatible with your system. So when that is done, in order for you to be able to successfully run PHP programs on in your browser, you're required to save your PHP projects in the web folder of the web server you installed. Mine is XAMPP, so the web folder for the for XAMPP is called htdocs. Inside of htdocs is where I'll be storing all my projects. So you can actually store your projects in this htdocs folder. You can save a PHP file here, but it's always advised you save your projects or your files in a folder according to the project you're working on. So we're currently on, so I'll save my folder as Zuritut, and I'll load it up on my IDE. So I'm going to open this folder here in my IDE, and all right. So when that is done, you can just create a PHP file. So I'm going to create a PHP file, name it data types.php. And in order for you to actually run this particular script on the browser, all you need to do is just come here and type in the name, your localhost / your folder name. So mine is Zuritut / the name of the file you want to run. So when you run this currently will not open because you've not actually started your XAMPP server. So if I'll come here to start my XAMPP, I'll click on start. So when this starts, currently the page has loaded, and also the PHP file rather has loaded. So I can actually write anything here and come back here to reload the page, and everything works fine. So in case you maybe run into an issue installing the XAMPP, and maybe it must have caused you to change your port. Maybe your port is no longer the default port. So you can come here and specify the port your Apache server is running on. So let's say it's 8080. After specifying it, just hit enter. So by default, I'm running on the default, so I can easily do this. So that being said, let's go straight to today's class, which is data types. So basically what comes to your mind is, what exactly is data types? Data types generally or basically are used to represent the type of data associated with a variable or function's return types. So let's say, for instance, when you create a variable in any programming language and you assign it to a value. Now the data type of this value is associated with this variable. So this enables your computer, or rather the interpreter or compiler, based on whichever language you are using, know how you as the programmer intend to use what, intend to manipulate or use what this data that you stored or assigned to this variable. Now, in most programming language like C++, you are explicitly required to type, to specify or define the type of data you are assigning to a particular variable. So let's say you have this in C++, you first of all need to define the type, followed by the variable name assigned to a value. So if you don't do this in C++, you're going to be having errors. But in PHP being a loosely typed language, you don't need to explicitly state or define the type. So you can just create a variable and assign it to a value. So this works very fine in PHP, but in most programming language, you are not allowed to do that. So in PHP, we basically have 8 primitive data types, and these data types are classified into 3 types. Now, I'll start with the 3 types, 3 classifications of data types in PHP. So number 1, we have scalar data types. Number 2, we have compound data types. And the last one, number 3, we have special data types. So let's say that the number 1, the scalar data types they're actually data. They represent data that stores or they represent single value data. So the scalar data type, they actually represent single value data. So you're not allowed to store a list of values on when working with the scalar data types or even a collection of values. So that goes to the data type. You already know the meaning of compound, like the word compound. So while special data types represent zero values and resources. So these are the basic 3 classifications of data types in PHP. So like I said, the scalar data types, they only represent single value data, while the compound represents or allow you to store collections of values. And special data type represents zero values or resources. So before I go into specifying each data types under each of the 3 I just mentioned, I want us to quickly talk about how to attribute data in PHP. So one way we attribute data in PHP is by using what? The echo, a keyword or other function. Number 2 is we use print. We can use print. Number 3, we can use print arrow. And number 4, okay, so these are the basic 4 ways we actually attribute data to the browser using PHP. Now, each of these functions or keyword rather, has their own use cases. Each of them has their own use cases, depending on the data you are working with, or depending on the data you are trying to attribute to the browser. So for Echo allows you to attribute scalar data types. So only data store single values or only single value data. And for print and echo, they are not actually different. The only difference between the echo and print is that echo allows you to store multiple parameters, or allows you to attribute multiple parameters. While print, you can only use one parameter, you can only attribute one parameter, and echo is quite faster than print. So the best practice, or what almost every developer uses to attribute single data values, is they use echo instead of print. So we have print arrow. The next is print arrow. So print arrow is basically used to attribute compound data types. So it's normally used by every developer to attribute compound data types. So var dump actually does the same thing that print arrow does, but var dump gives you a more detailed information about the data you're trying to attribute to your browser. So let's go over to each of these data we can work with in PHP. So under here, I'm just going to say for scalar data type, under scalar data type. So I'm going to list the data that fall under scalar data type. So we have integers, and we have float or double. We also have and we also have boolean. Okay, so the next one is the compound data type. So the compound data type, we have arrays and objects. Under special data type, we just have null and resources. So here, so let's talk about the number one, which is scalar data type. So from the definition, we said it's basically just represents single value data. So integers are basically just number values or whole numbers. So integers are basically whole numbers ranging from both positive or negative, both positive or negative value. So an example of that is 1, 2, 3, or 5. Why float or double? Why float stores basically decimals. Boolean only stores case insensitive data. So here, we're just going to quickly write some code on these guys. So here I'm going to say, for the first one, I'm going to output this, I'm going to assign this to a variable. So the first one, number, you can say 1. So the data type for this now is called integer. So you can use something like, let's say, echo to attribute number to the browser. So when you run this guy here, you have 1 attributed for you here on the browser. So you can also do stuff. You can do mathematical, other math operations here, or any other logical operations, say +4, and this will be attributed for you on the browser, which is 5. So that's it for the integers. We also have strings, rather. We also have strings. So strings are basic data type. You can actually just use echo to attribute it. So the next, let's say we have a string. Let's say we have someone's name to be James, we say echo name. When you attribute this to the browser, you have James attributed for you here on the browser. So basically use what echo to attribute what single values. You also then Boolean, you can use it to, you can say Boolean, you can assign this to a variable. Let's say Boolean should be true. Now, when you run this guy here, when you run this line of this code on the browser, and you'll be expecting to see maybe true attributed for you on the browser, but true in PHP is actually represented as 1, while false is represented as 0. You can't actually see what is happening in, unless you typecast it to an integer. So false just represents 0, nothing. So it won't actually show that there's anything here on the browser. So that's it for scalar data types. You basically just use echo to attribute such data and perform any mathematical operations or any other relational or logical operations on them. So the next one we want to talk about is basically compound data types. So we'll have just 2 data types under compound data type, which is arrays and objects. So arrays are just collections or list of data. So each of these values in arrays are called elements. So they are ordered by what, and by index starting from 0. So an array is just arrays. Arrays are just list of what values. Then objects are basically an example. Let's talk about an example of an array. So let's say we have an array to be called array to arrays. Then you just put the values you want. Let's say we're creating an array of numbers. You can say 1 or list of numbers 2, 3, and 4. So this has actually created a data or a collection of what data is for us, and we are associated with this variable called what array. So to attribute this on the browser, if we try to use echo, remember when we defined or when we talked about ways we attribute data to the browser, we mentioned about 4. So we said print and var dump are basically used to attribute what compound data, while echo are used to attribute scalar data types. So if I try to use echo here on this data type, I'm going to get an error message saying array to string conversion on line 37. So what that means is that we are not allowed to use what echo on array data types or array values. So in order for us to attribute or see these values or this collection of list of values in our browser, we basically just use the print arrow or var dump. So if we use this, we have an array listed here for us. So this is what the array. So if you notice something, the array actually started from, it gave us some index. No, this index is actually what is used to associate this value, or rather to represent this value 1. So it starts counting from where 0, 1, 2, 3, basically. Now let me quickly show you the difference between print arrow and var dump. So if I try to use var dump here and say array, now let's see the difference here. Now, if you notice something, this guy here was printed using or attributed here on the browser using var dump, while this first array here is printed on the browser using print arrow. Now, if you notice the difference, this one here gives us more detailed information by showing us the length of the array, and in each element of the array, it tells us the data type of each element in the array. So the first one is an integer. We have int by the side of it, which says that the data type for this element or this value is integer. So unlike the normal array using print arrow, we basically just have what a plain collections of data attributed for us here on the browser. So in order for us, so that's the difference between var dump and print arrow. So here we can say, okay, another way to define or to create arrays, you can use what the square bracket. So this will actually attribute the same thing. So this will actually just attribute the same thing. So I'm going to comment this one out. So this guy will actually just attribute the same thing or do the same thing right on the browser for us. So we have this, though we added one more element to just state the difference, 5, and the length here still is 4. All right, so now the next data type under compound data types we want to talk about is objects. Objects are basically just instance of classes. So objects are just instance of classes. So in order for you to define objects or to create objects in PHP, you can just say, you can do stuff like, you can first of all define the class. Though you're not, we're not going to be going in depth on objects. I just want to show you how you can actually create an object. So I just say we have an object, say student, and so instead of the objects, we can actually have what instead of the class value, we can actually have different properties and methods. Different properties and methods. So, and when you instantiate this class, and let's say you say student object and say equal to new student. So when you say stuff like, let's say you create a variable here and say and you want to actually get this value. So in order for you to do that, you can say student var. So if you okay, so when you try to attribute this guy here, this is actually an instance of what an object. So this here is an instance of a class called what students. So this is it for object. So we basically won't have anything here attributed for us on the browser because we didn't actually assign anything to this. But I won't be going in depth on how the objects work. So we're just going to leave it out until. So we're going to comment this out and move over to the next topic due to time. So here we can. The next data type we want to talk about is special data types, which basically represents 0 values and the resources. Now, the first one is the null. Null basically just represents 0 values, like something that's empty. So when you assign a variable, let's say you create a var variable and you assign it to a null value. It's also case insensitive. That means you can choose to do null or null. So, and you try to attribute this to the browser, you actually get nothing attributed for you. So nothing is being attributed here because let me comment every other thing here so that you won't have any problems. So here, let me comment this guy. And let this just be the only value we're trying to attribute. So if I save this guy and reload, you see that nothing is being attributed for us here on the browser, not because that the code is not working, but just because a null value represents what 0, like it's empty, it's null, there's nothing there. So this comes in handy when you are actually trying to compare stuff or want to set a variable to null. Now, the next one I want to talk about are just resources. Now, resource data types are basically used to represent external external resources. So let's say, for instance, you are trying to get, like, when you start working with your database or PHP's file system. So whatever the resource data type just serves as an identifier which represents what your resource handlers, your resource handler. So let's say we have a file here, and we say let's use the fopen function to open a file and say, let me create a file here and say test.txt. So let this just be a plain file that we're trying to actually, let this be a resource file that we're trying to read using what PHP. So if I say test.txt, and I just append, add a second value to it. So what this would do is just simple. Let me comment this guy out. So what this would do is it's just going to pass a resource handler to this variable. So when that is done, I'll be able to manipulate or even do whatever I want with this text file. I can write or read data from the text file. I can also append data to the text file. We won't be going into much details now. We probably will do that in the future. So if you actually want to see what the data type that the file will attribute for you, so it's basically the variable just basically stores a handler. So if you try to attribute this guy on the browser, let's see what happens. We get a resource ID attributed for us here on the browser. So this is just basically how this resource data type works. So with this data, or with this ID, with this resource ID you are seeing here, you can manipulate or do whatever you want with the content of with the contents that are stored inside of this file here. So let's see. So here we go. So I'm also going to comment these guys up. And let's see what's, okay, so that's it basically for PHP data types. So if I'm going to recap, I said we have 8 primitive data types in PHP, which are classified into basically three types. So we have the scalar data types and also the compound data types. The scalar data type is made up of just integers, floats, boolean, and strings. So strings are just sequence of characters under or double quotes. We have compound data types. Compound data types are basically represent or store collections of values. We have arrays and objects. Then the least one, which is the third one, special data types, they just represent 0 values and resource data of values. So if time permits, let's quickly talk about variable interpolations. So I'm through more hints on variables, or rather variable interpolation. So what is means is, so it's basically a feature in PHP that enables you add a variable or define or write a variable inside a double quote or have variables inside double quotes. So let's say, for instance, you have something like let's say, let's just plain test. var equals to hello. Let var just be basically hello, and we have, or rather, let's change this guy to what? Give you a better example. So, and you have something like you want to attribute this guy, and maybe when you start working and your boss tells you, okay, so instead of having just word here, instead of having just word here, I want you to attribute hello world using just this variable, that's been assigned to the word, the value word. So here, if I say echo, I can do something like, I'll say echo So you might be wondering, how then are you going to do that? So if you say, okay, let's just say hello, right? Instead of typing hello world here, and you already have a variable that's been assigned to this string word or to the value word. So instead of doing this with variable interpolation, you can do something like you can have var inside of what you can have a variable inside a double word, inside a double quote. Now, if I run this on the browser, I'm going to have hello world here attributed for me on the browser. So one way you can also do this is by using PHP's concatenation. So you can to concatenate using PHP, that means to bind a value on the left side with a value on the right side. You can use what the period sign followed by the value you intend to bind or attach or with the value on the left side. If I run this, we still get the same thing. We still get the same thing attributed for us. So with variable interpolation, you're able to do more stuff. So take note, you're not allowed to do this with single quotes. Now, when you use single quotes, PHP is basically just going to see this as a string. And when you attribute this, you get hello var. So this is not what you want. PHP is basically just saying this as a string. So we are going to go back to the default, which is var. And we have what hello world attributed for us on the browser. So that's it for today. And I hope you understand and you've been following. Okay. I think I have a question here which says, please, is it possible to combine two values together? For example, the null and the resource data type. Actually, you can't, okay, the first question, which just, you can't actually combine two different data types together using maybe concatenations or variable interpolations. You can't do that. You can't do that. So though if you when you start getting more experience working with PHP, you'll be able to create probably stuff like you'll be able to use compound data types to combine these two values together. So an example is like arrays. Let's say you have arrays, you can have a null value stored inside of an array as an element. You can also have resource data types. So most of these questions, I'm going to reshare the answers to you on the Slack workspace, or rather on the workspace. So the second question says, please, is there any other place to download XAMPP with 32-bit? My PC is 32-bit and not 62-bit. You can actually find it on their website. Okay, you can actually send it. You can actually find these stuffs on their website, I think. But we are going to share a link to where you can actually find this or download it. So that's it for, since there are no more questions. So that will be it for today. All right. Bye-bye. See you guys later.